May Jesus Christ give it. And forward with Mary. Good evening to all of you, dear children. We meet for this Monday evening appointment with the Rosary Confraternity. Although, to tell the truth, tonight's theme may be of interest to everyone, not only those who are part of the Rosary people of the Confraternity. The title, as you see in the description, is New World Order. I made the acronym as it is in English, N-W. What does New World Order and New Global Axis mean? Period. The salvation in the Rosario. Here, as you can see. It's a very important topic that I will address quite quickly, because I've talked about it extensively these days in the column Saints and Coffee. And that evidently forces us to keep the movements in mind. I'd say so, the dynamism that's happening all over the world. I would like to start from the following premise. A well-known theologian, for those familiar with Protestant theology, named Karl Barth, a friend of von Balthasar, used to say that in the morning he would hold the Bible, the newspaper, the daily paper. He meant that he read the events of history which happened before our eyes in light of, or with the light of God's Word. I prefer to say in the light of God's Word. So transcribing Karl Barth's expression, I'd like to say that we hold on the one hand daily life and on the other the Rosary, which echoes the Word of God. Because with the Rosary, we are called to interpret what is happening in the world. What's happening in the world is no small matter. Perhaps the most distracted among us don't notice it. But these days I'm particularly, and I want to tell you, troubled by what's happening on the world geopolitical stage. Because the story of salvation, listen carefully to this, but you've heard me say it many times, the work of redemption doesn't take place above our heads. I've met too many people who then left me, who expect the apocalypse to happen above their heads. And remember that the biblical revelation is not above our heads, but in the history of mankind. And it's through history that God reveals his plan of salvation, not above history. Salvation is not metahistorical. Salvation is intrahistorical, even if it comes from heaven. What am I trying to say with this? I remember, for example, there was a group I'd met from Sicily who came to court me with a pseudo-mystic they'd met. If I remember correctly, but I think so, even among Celestines, and this mystic. Then when Pope Benedict XVI died, you could see one of those who had said, Pope Benedict wasn't really dead, but had taken refuge in some sort of cave. And from there he would come, in a couple of years, to save the planet. Certainly, I immediately distanced myself from this absolute nonsense, and that's why I paid the price, because then they came after me. I will always keep my distance, and I wish you'd stay away from me. Whoever has a somewhat fanatical vision of salvation and thinks that this solution to the case, especially in this moment of total advancement of anti-Christian power, should be resolved above our heads. Personally, I keep my distance. History's where it all unfolds. And in this period, we are witnessing absolutely unexpected revolutions. I would like to clarify right away regarding the axis that I see, glimpse, because I haven't read it anywhere, so I see it myself, and perhaps, since I'm not an expert, I apologize for that. I will then immediately move on to the spiritual topic, that is, how to manage all this with novenas and rosaries, this epochal transition. A paradigm shift. I didn't speak, but the president of Argentina, Milei, did, and I found out he did it, not as I said this morning, and I apologize for it, sometimes because I'm traveling. Keeping the schedule of Radio Domina Nostra is a martyrdom operation, sometimes. I said, if I remember correctly this morning, that Milei gave this speech in Argentina. No, he didn't give it in Argentina. He gave it in Davos, actually, just a stone's throw from northern Italy. Beyond Lake Iseo, just past the border. Italian-Swiss, Italian-Helvetic, a discourse where, as we will see now, he talks about a paradigm shift. So I know that in Italy, too, there are dissenting voices about what's happening, and I must say that sometimes they convince me. I'm quite convinced, for example, by what Professor Diego Fusaro says, essayist, commentator, and I find his suspicions regarding Donald Trump and the American administration in power interesting. At this moment, however, look, I don't want to go into the merits of geopolitical issues. I just want to, and this is a matter of fact, that I think even Fusaro will recognize, as will others, and I just want to highlight that unexpectedly. And I believe, I repeat, that personalities of Fusaro's caliber and others recognize this. But it would be enough to read non-Italian newspapers to realize it. We are truly in the presence of an unexpected paradigm shift. How this will now evolve, we don't know. So then, after this introduction, I'll make the first move. The first move is a very quick analysis, once again, of what's happening. For those who haven't noticed, what's happening is that while the international left is moving forward, I read something today that I already knew, and it appeared before me unexpectedly. It almost seemed like a sign to me, a public and true declaration from the Cardinal. Few people know Jean-Louis Tauran, the Cardinal who announced the election of the so-called Pope Francis. This Cardinal, President of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, if I'm not mistaken, he was President of the French Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue. He said that Cardinal Bergoglio, Pope Francis, had been elected in his first statement after the election. Because you carry on the world left's battle against the right, and you clear against the right, and you clear. The woke ideology, what's now called the woke ideology, wasn't even called that back in 2013. That is a sort of Agenda 2030. And it seemed that things were moving forward. I invite all of you from the small remainder to reflect on how someone like Jorge Mario Bergoglio might feel, who is 86 years old and sees his plan failing. Do you understand me, children of the little remainder? Because God grants us victories not as we or where we expect them, but where He says. Bergoglio is witnessing the return, the comeback of Donald Trump. Bergoglio is witnessing the development and birth, unexpected, I repeat, in my opinion, unexpected, from the conservative right, guardian of traditional values, which should have defended the Catholic Church too, and that the Catholic Church is not like homeland, family, and God above all. I will give just one example so you understand. Sorry to make it clear, I am not an analyst, I am not a geopolitical expert. I am a simple priest who, however, does not give up being a theologian and an analyst of world situations as a reading of the history of salvation. In this, I thank my mentor von Balthasar. Notice the speech Donald Trump gave on Inauguration Day. He talked about a clear plan to reject the LGBT agenda. It's as if the echo of Moscow, pronounced in 2025, 2.5 years ago, from Patriarch Kirill, who said that we don't agree with gay parades, pride, with the demands of the LGBT world. And so on, he arrived in Washington, and unexpectedly Biden apparently gets sick. He's no longer able because he forgets things. Who is doing all this, dear children? But where do you expect the 7 trumpets? But where do you see them? You wait for cosmic signs. But where do you expect God's great initiatives? Don't you see them in these things? We wouldn't have Trump and now the White House if Biden hadn't, I don't know if I can say it, gotten sick anyway in front of everyone. He messed up, as we say where I come from, in a resounding way, mistaking fireflies for lanterns and leading people up the garden path. Trump's Republican Party, because it was clear that in the end, Kamala Harris would never have been able to make it. Who steps in? Can't you see Providence at work? I think so, the failed attack. Now, I won't say Trump's a saint. I never will, since I don't know or trust him. I don't trust, not him, I don't trust the establishment in general, whatever it may be. But I know that God speaks, acts, and intervenes through them as well. Imagine the psychology of Jorge Mario Bergoglio. Have you thought about this? I believe not. Imagine this man, for 12 years, has been making a superhuman effort because no pope now, whether he's pope or not anyway. No one sitting on the throne of Peter has reached 88 years old. How did he get there? His doctors say, Bergoglio's medical staff say, that he has the body of a 90-year-old, but the mind and the will of a 60-year-old. Yes, all right, but God is forcing him to see. Look, it's something we can't just ignore. He's forcing him to see that Donald Trump won at the White House and says no to the world. LGBT to the world left, not to the agreement on the environment, 𝐸 and not Trump's signature of the greatest world power. Apparently also on a military level, although China is emerging. And anyway, who says no to the globalist agenda that Bergoglio has pushed forward? They bowed down at the last G8. It's not that I'm talking about made-up stuff. Have you seen a bow from the powerful people of the world at the G8? Meloni's there too, now in a pickle, as I said, since Trump won. But what I'd like to say is that Bergoglio is realizing that it's over, that in the end, he's lost. Do you realize what I'm saying? Because his fellow countrymen, 𝐸𝐻𝐾 in Davos near here, so I thought he had said in Argentina, he's got real guts. This guy, whoever he is, watch out. I repeat, I'm not talking about the moral and holy aspect of these men above their political strategy, which clearly looks at Moscow from a distance. You understand, that is, Moscow, Washington, Buenos Aires, Rome. It's been created because it's clear that the administration, Meloni, that the Meloni government is siding, quite evidently it seems, when here, just a few months ago, we had to witness the appeal to the Supreme Court for the trial of Matteo Salvini, because he rejected the immigrants. And now we see images coming from the United States of entire groups of immigrants sent back to their countries. Until a few weeks ago, all of this was unthinkable. They thought Trump would. We're playing the card of diplomatic cunning. Instead, he's actually signing document after document that are practically displacing the international left, of which Bergoglio was probably the spiritual leader. Was, I say, because now the international left must find a new identity, and it had better do it soon, because like this, it's melting under the scorching sun of this new world axis. I don't know if I managed to explain it. I hope so. But the Argentinian president, he rocked Davos with a speech against the woke revolution. He fired broadsides against the obsessions of the new century, from environmentalism to transgenderism. I mean, transgenderism, moving on then especially. And here I find him truly, allow me to use this adjective, agreeable, pro-abortion, for the pro-abortion agenda. He started his speech like that, Javier Milei. He started his speech like that. How much has it changed? His words. At Davos, here in Europe. Here, this is an image I asked the director to present. And the Italo-Argentinian alliance between the right-wing governments of Meloni and Javier Milei. Javier Milei began his speech on the 18th of January, 2024. With these exact words, how much has it changed in such a short time? In short, we are witnessing an extraordinary speech in terms of courage, where he says that now he no longer feels alone. Lentamente. Quella che sembrava, sono parole sue, un'egemonia assoluta a livello globale della sinistra woke nella politica, nelle istituzioni educative, nei media. In supranational organizations or forums like Davos, it has tilted, and he said one begins to glimpse hope for the future. In short, dear friends, look at Milei, who stands against abortion and transgenderism, against syncretic globalism, and against the LGBT agenda. Talks like the Pope compared to, like Bergoglio, instead speaks as a representative, not as Pope, but as a representative, a spiritual leader of the international left and the New World Order. I don't know if you realize what time we're in. I'll get to how to handle it in a bit. And without mincing words, 𝐸𝐵 attacked, in his own words, quote, the protagonists and promoters of the woke agenda. Many damages are being caused to the West. We are also victims of this harm. Victim is, in the small and perhaps in anonymity compared to the major world news. Don Enrico Berlusconi, victim is Brother Celestino of the Cross, victim is Father Ramon Guidetti. To refer to those in Italy, because the other two are foreigners, has immediately fallen victim. It is Father Alessandro Minutella, stripped of the sacred robe, reduced to lay status by an usurper, impostor who unlawfully sits on Peter's throne without being the Pope, and who, to advance the globalist powers agenda, has been capable of destroying or attempting to destroy the priestly identity. Of the figures I have just mentioned, who are your guides? 𝐸𝐵 comes to Davos and says these things here. Don't you find it? Do I? Cyrus, king of Persia, saved Israel. Not the king of Israel, anointed with the holy oil, nor the prophets, nor even the high priest, but a pagan king from abroad. The great epidemic, 𝐸𝐵 says again, of our time that needs to be treated, cancer. His words? His words? Then, translating from Spanish to Italian isn't difficult at all. This I say in the Italian translation, echoed by several blogs. The cancer 𝐸𝐵 said that needs to be removed is the virus of woke ideology. Like hearing Moscow's patriarch 2 years ago when I was in Argentina, truly in Argentina. And I was targeted, attacked by the mainstream because I said that Kirill's speech, the Patriarch of Moscow, was extraordinary when he said that this war is not simply against Ukraine, but against the Western powers that wanted to bring the parades and floats of the gay pride to Moscow. 𝐸𝐵 still says that this ideology has colonized the world's most important institutions. My goodness, what courage to say that. These things here, the wind has changed, the direction of the flag has changed, the paradigm has changed, dear children. In the face of all this, I share the perplexities, I repeat, once again, of some commentators I respect like Diego Fusaro, who look with a certain deep suspicion at Trump and the Republican administration. I watch that closely. I believe everyone agrees that something in the world has changed. Europe is now in crisis, because Europe is essentially the flag, not the one we see with the blue background and the 12 stars, which, by the way, is taken from the Book of Revelation without those who approved it among the European Freemasons knowing it. But the flag that really matters in Europe today is that rainbow one. Look at 𝐸𝐵's courage. This ideology has colonized the world's most important institutions. That's what Kirill said. From the parties and states of the free countries of the West, to global governance organizations, through non-governmental institutions, universities, and the media, as well as marking the course of global debate in recent decades. Here there's a eulogy, let's say, would be to say, of madness. As Erasmus of Rotterdam said of Benedict XVI, in these last few days, passing through Eastern Europe and returning to Italy, I saw frozen fields. I told those in the car, there's wheat growing in those fields below, which rotting and dying soon germinates, soon rises again. Look, I think there's an unintentional tribute here, probably unconscious, paid, however, to Pope Benedict, who was forced to go out the door. Because the left-wing, woke, liberal, progressista, we know how much pressure there was. Remember the Swift block? It forced him to leave, to put in a standard bearer, who is Bergoglio, and who thought he'd won, and that God forces him to see with his eyes. This isn't a small matter. God is keeping Bergoglio alive, to see with his own eyes the failure of the project. Because I have no doubt, in my opinion, that regardless of what further damage may come from Trump, from Milley, from Putin, because man is always man, You can go from the frying pan into the fire, but excuse me, I would like to tell you the satisfaction one feels in seeing that Bergoglio has failed. Because unexpectedly, after barely 12 years, what seemed like a realized Project Bergoglio, who worked with Satan's partisans to build an alternative magisterium to the gospel, bless gay couples. What is all this? To promote a clear defender of the LGBT world as a preacher at the papal household, that Jesus and the centurion and the servant understood each other. Witnessing the appointments of bishops like McElroy in Washington, clearly pro-abortion and pro-LGBT, anti-life, etc., and then seeing that instead Trump wins and that the agenda he promotes is the defense of life and especially the radical rejection of the LGBT project, the LGBT agenda. Here we see the close-up, sofa between the two. Evidently, at this moment, the major figures in global history are Putin on my left and Donald Trump on the right. This is, of course, an archive photo. Belongs to the first Trump administration. Here, I was saying, all this shows how Bergoglio and the partisans of Satan in the Vatican are getting what they deserve. They are losing. I sing Vittoria. Do you understand me, my dear children? We must celebrate victory at this moment. Bergoglio has lost. Rome, conquered by Satan's partisans, by ecclesiastical masons, has lost its war while they sit there, imbarazzati, promoting the LGBT agenda, the blessing of gay couples, placing figures like McElroy, defender of McHenry, who is also a promoter of the LGBT agenda, in positions that matter. Trump signs documents in which he condemns and definitively rejects the LGBT agenda, and then the end of immigration. If it ends in America, rest assured it ends here too. I think around this part of the Mediterranean because in Italy there's the Meloni government. I don't trust human beings. I trust God, who is using these people. Certainly not saints with their ideologies. We of the small group don't have to now. So that it's clear to everyone, because I have enemies left and right supporting Trump's position and ideas. Also, for example, I can't understand what Elon Musk is doing in this world. Here, so am I. I share Diego Fusaro's concerns. However, I acknowledge that there is a paradigm shift. At least it seems so far. And we must know how to manage this paradigm shift. How? Meanwhile, I would like to add another excerpt from the historic speech by Javier Milei, President of Argentina, in Davos, promoting a socialist agenda while cunningly operating within the liberal paradigm. This political class has distorted the fundamental values of liberalism. This is essentially woke, the woke ideology, the result of the inversion of Western values. It's absolutely true. This is completely true. Every pillar, he says, of our civilization has been transformed into a distorted version of itself through the introduction of manipulative cultural mechanisms. And Bergoglio, without a doubt, belongs to this lot. What the Church, known as the Church of Rome, which some still insist on calling the Catholic Church, has done is shameful, vile, and disgraceful. They've thrown away the gospel of Jesus Christ and the teachings of titanic figures like John Paul II and Benedict XVI. On family and life, we only think of the 𝐓𝐮𝐻𝐼𝐸𝐵 𝑉ITAe by John Paul II, to embrace the grammar of dissent, as he would call it if I remember correctly. The Cardinal Newman, the grammar of dissent, which has instead become the transformative value. Western, relativist, and dominant. Benedict Sicilian left for saying there's a dictatorship of relativism. It seems to me that this dictatorship of relativism is collapsing due to this unexpected and perhaps not even planned, I presume, new axis stretching from Moscow to Washington, to Buenos Aires, to Rome, and who knows how many others. Now gradually, they will join this path. On this basis, Milei says, wokeism was built, a regime of single thought. That's exactly right. Anyone who did not conform to this way of thinking in past years, whether in the church like Father Minutella, Father Bernasconi, and Father Ramon, in public opinion like Professor Fusaro, Dr. Cianci, and others, whether in schools, factories, or universities, has been cornered. He was marginalized, he was demonized, and I believe if you are all 𝐤'𝐾𝐯𝐻 in Italy, what Dom Minutella went through, no one else has. A way of thinking, 𝐸LEI said, whose purpose is to penalize dissent. Feminism. We've talked about it several times with Brother Celestino around Italy. In December and November, and then in January, February, whenever it is, every time you turn on the television, it's always this story of femicide, femicide, femicide. There it is. Feminism. Diversity, inclusion, equity, immigration, abortion, you see. While Bergoglio remains silent on the scourge of abortion, 𝐸LEI defends human life from conception. The environmentalism, the gender ideology, among others, are heads. Here there's something evocative of the apocalypse. They are heads of the same creature whose purpose, etc., etc. The call to legislate, and especially this other step here by the same institutions, the LGBT agenda, is promoted. 𝐸LEI says, trying to impose on us that women are men, and me, Mamma Mia. But shouldn't the Pope of Rome be the one speaking like this? This is the sign that it wasn't. Pope Bergoglio has failed. The flag can be lowered. Dear children, understand then, if he still remains there to rot, swollen as he is, that's another story. But the flag can be lowered. You understand, little one, I remain, which is already a great victory for us. He says, but Trump, however, yes, I agree with you. But 1,000, totally agree. Hey, Meloni's perfectly with you. And yet Putin, well, flowers, dears. God uses whoever he wants. Balaam's ass, do you remember it? Who prophesies at a time when there were no prophets. Everything has changed. Bergoglio is forced, at the end of his mandate, which you know who gave him, watching it all crumble. Enough, enough! And this is the fate that befalls all those who dare to defy God's plan. Bergoglio isn't being condemned, as he should be, by these wretched cardinals, cowards, and spineless. May God forgive them, who have repeatedly remained silent while they witnessed the abuses and abuses of power that Bergoglio committed against those who didn't. Almost as if the church had become a sort of populist regime. The church isn't a populist regime, and yet they all kept quiet, shitting themselves. So God went looking for himself. I think this because I pray, 3 rosaries a day, and sometimes even more. So I have clear ideas. God went and looked for these other wretches outside the church, like 𝐸LEI, Trump, Putin, Meloni, who have formed this axis. That handshake, once again, will probably happen again, or maybe not, I don't know. But listen to what he's able to say. 𝐸LEI, authority, secular, and that is the church went to try to reinforce the church. The LGBT agenda has tried to impose on us that women are men and men are women just because they self-identify that way. The West is the cause of all evils. You must, but it's a borderline argument. I don't know. It's a program in Davos. The West's right here. I thought it was Buenos Aires. I was wrong this morning. I'd said Casa Rosada at Plaza de Mayo. No, it happened in Europe. The West now must redeem itself. I get goosebumps. The West now must redeem itself by opening its borders to the entire world. Otherwise, a collective suicide is coming. There isn't a single reference from the Argentine 𝐸LEI to the Argentine Bergoglio, who doesn't go to Argentina, who hasn't gone to Argentina so far. All right, that was the entire lengthy preamble that took up the whole episode, it seems. But now I must add the most important things. The evolving situation. Dear children, it resembles one of those paradigmatic shifts in history that require prayer. Do you remember the Soviet Union? The Soviet Union, which suddenly collapsed in on itself. On the 25th of December, 1991, the seemingly indestructible Soviet system of the Kremlin collapsed upon itself. Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev resigned. That day was Christmas for us Westerners. For us Latins, it was the day of the Lord's Nativity. He resigned from the position of first. And the sole president of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, established. The announcement of his resignation marked the end. 74 years of ruthless regime, which began with the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. From that moment, the Soviet Union dissolves. I would just like to remind you of this. On the 8th of December, 1991, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus met in Belovezha and Ayapuska to sign the Belovezha Accords, which declared the dissolution of the Soviet Union and replaced it with the Commonwealth of Independent States. All these dates are Marian and Christian. 8th of December, the agreement. 8 December, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. 12 December, the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. The secession of Russia is completed. The 25th of December, Christmas of the Lord, Gorbachev. At 6 o'clock in the evening, he unexpectedly resigns. Here is the paradigm shift, which closely resembles what is happening these weeks. From President of the Soviet Union, and he declares the office, the PEKIS, the Politburo, permanently abolished, transferring all powers and the Soviet presidential archive to the president of the new Russia, Boris Yeltsin. At 6:35, the Soviet flag with the sickle and hammer above the Kremlin, I get emotional telling it. Years later, it is lowered and replaced with the Russian tricolor. Now I would like to tell you in Medjugorje. The Madonna in that 1991 had intensified the message. I'm referring specifically to the historic message that the Madonna gave to Maria. That's why I say the current messages are not at all reliable. On the 25th of August 1991, the Madonna repeated several times the message of the 25th, the one from the parish, that Satan was strong, wanted to destroy the Madonna's plan. And the Madonna said she invited to pray a lot. I will read you the message from the 25th of August 1991. Dear children, today I also invite you to prayer, now more than ever, as my plan has begun to unfold. It's August 91. No one can imagine that what is about to happen in a few months is the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Madonna knows, since Soviet leaders spoke of it before. Madonna reveals it. Pray even more, because my plan is starting to unfold. So what is happening today is no less important than what happened in 91, when the Soviet Union collapsed. And the Madonna adds, Satan is strong and wishes to hinder the plans of peace and joy, and make you think that my son is not strong in his decisions. And here is the appeal of the Madonna. Therefore, I invite you, dear children, to pray and fast even more intensely. I invite you to renounce for 9 days. This is the most important step. This is truly a spine-chilling step. Listen, as they say, the Madonna, just months after the collapse of the Soviet Union. I invite you to renounce for 9 days. Attentive, so that with your help, everything I want to achieve through the secrets I began in Fatima. Impressive. This, and not, obviously, even Maria, here you can see the truth of the messages, could know what was secretly happening inside the studios and offices of the Politburo, when precisely during that period, they began to seriously consider the collapse of the Soviet Union. This was also due to other aspects which God, with his divine providence in history, has carried forward, as he is doing in our days, when Mile speaks from the Roman Pontiff. The Virgin Mary speaks of Fatima at the moment when the Soviet Union is about to collapse. This is simply extraordinary. He then listened to the message of the 25th of December, dear children. I bring you in a special way the little Jesus. This is precisely the day when the flag of the Soviet Union is finally lowered. The Madonna speaks of Jesus. And Our Lady adds further on, she says this, "Therefore, you who say you are mine and ask for my help, give all of yourselves." Themselves. This is the message of the 25th of September 1991, around 6:45 p.m., when more or less, about a quarter of an hour before, maybe I was born. But maybe there's a time difference. So maybe, more or less at the same time, the flag of the Soviet Union was lowered. Put God first in your families, so that He may grant you peace and protect you not only from war, but also in times of peace, from every satanic assault. Then we know about the meeting that took place between John Paul II and Gorbachev at St. Peter's, in the Vatican, a historic and unthinkable meeting. Planned for some time, and John Paul II had prepared himself. I've had the opportunity to tell this story. It was 1989, so before the collapse, he had spent the whole night in prayer. And this is the concluding message that I would like to send to all the faithful of the small remnant, and to those who are particularly registered, more than 1,300 people, in the confraternity of the Most Holy Rosary. John Paul II, the night before, meeting Mikhail Gorbachev, a historic meeting. As we recall, he'd spent the night in prayer. There's an episode recounted by Monsignor Giovanni d'Ercole, who at the time was a recorder in the Vatican Secretariat of State. He said he had met Monsignor Stanislaus Zivic, His Holiness's personal secretary. And since Gorbachev was late, Wojtyła, John Paul II, strolled, not at all nervously, but serenely, in the corridors of the halls and audience chambers, waiting for the Russian president to arrive. Well, then, he prayed. At a certain point, Monsignor d'Ercole recounts, he says, "I'm thinking specifically of Monsignor Simic. The Holy Father is preparing himself with prayer." His personal secretary, "Look, Monsignor, the Holy Father has been praying since last night." There, he'd prepared an extraordinary event with prayer. That's what we must do. Our Lady of Medjugorje requested a 9-day novena of prayer and sacrifice because, shortly thereafter, the Soviet Union would collapse, changing the world paradigm. Today we're facing something similar. I think that what is happening right now on a global level, which affects all 8 billion human beings on Earth, is something more than the collapse of the Twin Towers of Islamic fundamentalist terrorism. And what do I know about these developments, the resignation of Pope Benedict? It's all connected, especially to what's happening now. Just when it seemed that the woke ideology, the LGBT agenda, the 2030 agenda of the globalist world powers was being implemented, these protagonists emerge, not saints, of whom I don't know. What results can we expect? Who are, however, very clear right now about the fact that the LGBT agenda is blocked forever for them. And we're talking about the two most important presidents on the planet, the one from Washington and the one from Moscow. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin together, though not in agreement. As far as we know, of course. They are deciding to put an end to these gay pride parades. And frankly, all this can only please us. We are pleased that Bergoglio has to witness the downfall because he deserves it for all the harm he has brought into Roman Catholicism. And that's nothing. But I think it's important for him to see it because they're telling him, probably if they have the courage to tell him, because he gets angry for nothing, because I know they told me that now I don't know anymore, but before he used to. He would bang his fists and shout, so they were afraid to go and tell him things. I assume he must know about what's happening with Trump. And you only need to look at the photos of Trump's historic meeting with Bergoglio to see how Bergoglio wasn't happy to meet him. It is quite evident the annoyance Bergoglio feels having to welcome to the Vatican someone who should instead be above all parties, because he is the vicar of Christ. The President of the United States of America, who is now there again, they say sometimes they come back, sometimes they return. And Trump is back, and Trump is no friend of Bergoglio, just as he is no friend of Biden. Biden? Before leaving, one of the last things he did was to give an honor to Pope Francis. Doesn't that seem like a swan song to you? Of course it is. They gratify each other while they fall apart. A brilliant Trump. He stands there and signs decrees against immigration, against abortion, and especially against the LGBT agenda. The young and vigorous 𝐕𝐼 from Argentina is coming to Europe, pointing the finger at the woke agenda, saying that the paradigm has changed forever and that Europe needs to make up its mind, otherwise it will witness its own suicide. The Meloni goes to attend the inauguration day of Trump and Putin. On the other hand, he stands firm as a polar bear against all the provocations coming from the West. In short, it truly is a paradigm shift, and we can't know exactly where it might lead, but we must manage it with a rosary in hand. So Our Lady's appeal, I believe, through me, becomes useful, like the one on the 25th of August, 1991, in Medjugorje. Here, this is the photo. Look at Bergoglio's face. Like this, you can't see much there. This way you can see him better. Tell me if it's normal and reasonable for Bergoglio to appear so indisposed, and now he's got it there again. Maybe he'll have to meet him again, because sooner or later, if he holds up, Bergoglio will be forced to meet him again. These aren't the true victories that the Holy Spirit achieves, that the Madonna with her Immaculate Heart achieves. And here there's also the sacrifice of Father Enrico Berlusconi, of Brother Celestino della Croce, and of Father Ramon Guidetti. And here is the sacrifice of Don Pavel Tsiap, and here is the sacrifice of Father Johannes Lerner, and here is my own sacrifice. For years he was there shouting, waiting for God to intervene. God has his own ways of intervening. We are there witnessing the beginning of the downfall of the transatlantic global syncretist, led by the impostor who is from Rome. And we, with the rosary crown, move forward, praised be Jesus Christ, and onward with Mary.